you're more tired than you admit. Not physically, or not only physically. The physical tired is the one you know how to name, the one that has a cause you can point to. Too many late nights, too much on your plate, a week that went harder than expected. That tired makes sense. It has a solution. You sleep, you rest, you let things be lighter for a few days, and it passes. The tired I'm talking about doesn't pass. You sleep and you wake up and it's still there. Not in your body, in something underneath your body, in the specific heaviness of continuing. Of managing, of showing up and being present and doing all the things that being a person in the world requires, every day without enough of what would actually restore you. That tired is different, and has been there longer than you've been admitting. I want to talk about it, not to add to the weight, to try to name it accurately for once. Because I think you've been explaining away a real and significant exhaustion for a long time by locating it in surface causes and treating surface symptoms, and the surface treatments keep not quite working. And the tired keeps being there, because it's not a surface thing, it runs deeper than that. Let me start with what's actually draining you, because I think it's more specific than just life being a lot. Life is always a lot for everyone, and not everyone is this tired. The difference is in what you've been carrying that most people around you don't know you're carrying. You've been managing other people's emotional experience of you constantly. Every interaction has a background layer that most people don't have. The monitoring, the calibration, the real-time assessment of how you're landing, whether you're taking up too much space, whether the version of yourself that just came out was appropriate or too much or not enough. You're having the conversation and also evaluating the conversation simultaneously. You're in the room and also watching yourself be in the room from a slight remove. That dual processing is exhausting in a way that's almost impossible to explain to someone who doesn't do it. Because from the outside, it looks like you're just talking to people. From the inside, it's a full-time job running in parallel with everything else. You've been doing the work of being strong for people who haven't asked you to be strong, but who you've decided need you to be strong anyway. This is a specific kind of tired that strong people carry and never talk about. The unasked for weight of being the reliable one, the person who handles things. The one who doesn't fall apart, who keeps going, who manages the difficulty so that other people don't have to see it managed. That role was never formally assigned to you. It just became yours because you were capable, and because being capable meant it kept landing on you, and because at some point you stopped questioning whether you were supposed to carry it, and just carried it. You've been living with unresolved things. Old grief that didn't get properly grieved, a relationship that ended without closure, a version of yourself you had to give up without fully mourning the giving up. Old anger that never got expressed, old hurt that got managed rather than felt. Those things don't disappear just because you move forward from them. They stay in you. They take up energy, not in the active way of acute pain, but in the maintenance way of things that are being held rather than completed. And holding things, even when they're quiet, costs something. You've been performing okay when you're not okay. And the performance, the smile that arrives on schedule, the I'm fine that comes out automatically. The version of yourself designed to function in the world without making anyone uncomfortable with the reality of how you actually are. That performance is work. Every day. Without acknowledgement, without credit, without anyone knowing it's happening. All of that is running simultaneously. All of it is drawing from the same finite resource, and nobody is restoring it. Least of all you. Here's what the tiredness looks like when it's been there long enough to become baseline. Because I think you've had it so long you've started to think this is just how life feels. It looks like a specific flatness to things that used to have texture, not sadness, flatness. Like the volume on everything has been turned down slightly. Things that should move you don't quite move you the same way. Things that should excite you produce something more muted than excitement. You can identify that something is good without quite being able to feel that it's good. The feeling is there, but it's behind glass. Present but not accessible in the full, immediate, it-landed way it used to be. It looks like dreading things you used to look forward to. Not all of them. Some things still spark. But there's a subset of things that used to feel like relief or joy that now feel like effort before they feel like anything else. Social things especially. You want to see people, you love people, but the lead up to being with people now has this weight to it that it didn't used to have. Because being with people requires being on. Requires the management, requires showing up as the version that doesn't add to anyone else's load. And you're tired before you start. It looks like small things landing harder than they should. Something minor goes wrong. A small disappointment. A brief moment of feeling unseen. Something that would have bounced off you in a less depleted state. And it lands with a weight that feels disproportionate. And you tell yourself you're being too sensitive, you're overreacting, you're making more of this than it deserves. But you're not overreacting. You're under-resourced. The thing isn't too big. You're too empty. It looks like the effort it takes to do basic things being higher than it should be. Not impossible, you're still doing them. But it costs more than it used to. Getting out of bed on hard mornings, answering messages. Starting things, the activation energy required for ordinary life has gone up, and you've been compensating by pushing through and calling it fine. I want to talk about why you won't admit how tired you are, because I think the not admitting is as significant as the tiredness itself. Part of it is that admitting it means acknowledging you need something. And needing things has been complicated for you, either because asking for what you need has historically not produced what you needed, so you stopped asking, or because somewhere in your history you learned that needing too much was a burden, was weakness, was a thing that made you difficult to love, so you became someone who didn't need. Who handled it? Who was fine? Part of it is that you don't know who you'd tell. The people in your life know the strong version of you. They rely on the strong version of you, and telling them how tired you actually are means disrupting a dynamic that has been established for a long time. It means asking them to hold something they may not have signed up to hold. It means vulnerability in the specific direction that feels most exposing. Not emotional vulnerability in general, but this specific admission of being less than what you've been presenting. Part of it is that the tired feels too vague to justify the asking. You can't point to a single cause, there's no crisis, nothing catastrophically wrong. Just this ongoing, diffuse, hard to articulate weight of continuing. And the absence of a specific cause makes it feel like it doesn't warrant a specific response. Like you'd be making a fuss about nothing. Like the complaint requires more justification than just, I'm tired in a way that doesn't go away. That is justification enough. The chronic, sourceless tired is actually more significant than the acute tired with a clear cause. Because the acute one has a solution, and the chronic one is telling you something about the sustainability of how you've been living. Let me talk about the things that should be restoring you but aren't. Because this is where the real picture of the exhaustion lives. Sleep should restore you, and it partially does. You wake up functional, but not refreshed, not in the way sleep is supposed to work. The way it would work if the tired were only physical. You wake up rested in your body and still tired underneath. And you notice it for a moment, and then the day starts and you get moving, and you don't think about it again until the next morning when the same thing is true again. Time off should restore you, and sometimes it does briefly. But there's a kind of rest that isn't available in time off if you're still doing the internal work, the managing, the monitoring, the performance, even when the external demands are reduced. You can be on holiday and still be exhausting yourself. You can have a free weekend and spend it in the same low-grade management of your own emotional experience that you do every other day. The context changes. The underlying thing keeps running. Good experiences should restore you, and they provide a lift, but the lift doesn't last as long as it used to. The good thing happens, and it's genuinely good, and then it passes and you're back to where you were relatively quickly, like a phone that charges but doesn't hold the charge the way it once did. The capacity is smaller than it was. The depletion is deeper than what good experiences can reach, because the thing depleting you isn't in the category of things that ordinary rest addresses. It's in the category of things that require a different kind of intervention. Honest acknowledgement of what's actually being carried. Real expression of the things that have been held in. A different relationship with the need to always be okay. And genuine connection, the kind where the full weight of you is actually present and actually received, which is different from the managed presence connection you've been getting by with. There's something I want to name about the specific exhaustion of being the strong person that I haven't seen named anywhere else. Being strong for other people is a form of love. Real, genuine love. You show up for the people you care about in ways that cost you something real, and you do it because they matter to you, and because you can, and because that's the kind of person you are. But being strong all the time, never needing, never falling apart, never being the one who gets held, that's not love. That's a performance of invulnerability that serves nobody. Not the people you love who are being denied the opportunity to show up for you in the way you show up for them. Not you, who is being denied the specific restoration that comes from actually being cared for rather than caring. There is a particular nourishment that comes from being genuinely supported. Not fixed, not advised, not reassured, supported. Someone being with you in the hard thing without trying to resolve it. Someone receiving the weight without flinching. Someone knowing how tired you actually are and not treating that knowledge as a burden. You haven't been getting that. Not in the full, real, actually nourishing version. You've been getting the polite version, the concerned but managed version, the version people offer when they care about you but don't know what you actually need. The strength has been keeping out the specific thing that would actually help. I want to say something about the relationship between this tired and the people in your life, because I think there's a version of this that's specifically about the gap between what you give and what you receive, and that gap has been wider for longer than you've admitted. You've been emotionally available to a lot of people. When they're struggling, you're there. You ask the questions that go somewhere real. You sit with them in the hard things without trying to resolve it before it's ready. You follow up, you remember. You show up in the specific ways that actually help, not just the ways that look like helping from a distance. And that availability is genuine. It's not a performance that comes from a real place in you, a capacity for care that is one of the most valuable things about you. But it is not free. It costs something every time. And when the returning flow, people being that available to you, showing up for you in those specific ways, sitting with you in your hard things with the same quality of presence you bring to theirs, when that returning flow is smaller than what's going out, the account starts to run low. And you probably know who in your life genuinely reciprocates that level of presence and who receives it without returning it. You know. You've known for a while, and you've kept showing up for both categories equally because that's who you are. You don't ration your care based on whether it's being matched. But the ones who receive without returning are drawing from a resource that isn't being replenished. And over time, that's a significant part of what's made you this tired. This isn't about cutting people off or keeping score. It's about honestly assessing where your energy goes and whether the places it goes are giving you anything back. Not in a transactional way, just, is this relationship nourishing me in some way, or am I only ever the one who pours? Some of what you're carrying is love that has been going out without enough coming back. And acknowledging that, even quietly, even just to yourself, is part of addressing the tired. Here is what I want you to hear. Not as a comfort, as a real thing. You are allowed to be tired, not as a temporary concession, as a simple, honest acknowledgement of what is true. You have been carrying a lot, more than most people around you know, more than you've been willing to say, in more directions simultaneously than was sustainable for longer than was wise. And the fact that you've been managing it, that you continue to function, to show up, to be present for the people who need you, to do all the external things that require doing, that doesn't mean the weight isn't real. It just means you're strong. And strength is not the same as not needing anything. You need rest, real rest, in the forms that actually work. Not just sleep, but the rest that comes from being honest about how you are. From putting some of what you're carrying down, from letting someone who is actually capable of receiving it know what's actually going on with you, you need to stop performing okay when you're not okay. Not permanently, not in every context. Some performances are just the cost of being a person in the world. But in the places that matter, with the people who have earned it, the performance can stop. You can be what you actually are. Tired and trying and more okay than you give yourself credit for, but genuinely carrying something that deserves to be acknowledged. You need to grieve some things that you moved past without grieving. Some things that got handled rather than felt. The closure that didn't come. The version of yourself you had to set aside. The relationships that ended in ways that left questions unanswered. Some of what's making you tired is the energy of holding things in suspension that need to be completed. The tired you've been carrying. The real one, the deep one. The one that's been there underneath everything. It's not a character flaw. It's not weakness. It's not evidence that you can't handle things. It's evidence that you've been handling too many things for too long without enough of what would actually help. That's not a failure, that's just an unsustainable equation that finally needs to be addressed. The addressing starts with the admission. You're tired, more tired than you've been letting on, more tired than you've been letting yourself acknowledge. And that's okay. It's okay to be tired. It's okay to need the rest that actually works. It's okay to let someone know what you're actually carrying. You don't have to be the strong one right now. You've been the strong one long enough. I think the hardest part about something ending is realizing it was already ending while you were still trying to save it. When I look back now, I can see it clearly. The small pauses, the delayed replies, the way their voice changed just slightly. Not enough to call it out, but enough to feel it. But back then, I called it stress. I called it timing. I called it, we're just going through a phase. Because admitting it wasn't meant to last would have meant admitting I was holding on to something already slipping through my hands. It didn't start badly. That's the thing. It started with intensity, with late night conversations that made sleep feel optional, with inside jokes that felt sacred, with that rush of feeling chosen, like out of everyone in the world, they saw me. And when you feel seen like that, you don't question it. You don't prepare for it to end. You just lean in. I leaned in fully. I memorized their patterns, their favorite songs, the way they said my name when they were tired. I built a version of the future in my head without even realizing it. Not a marriage and forever. Nothing dramatic, just consistency. Just comfort. Just them. Staying. But somewhere along the way, I started feeling like I was the only one building. They still talked to me, still laughed, still said the right things. But something was missing. Effort. And when effort slowly disappears, you start replacing it with your own. I texted first more often, I asked deeper questions, I reassured them when they seemed distant. I made excuses for their silence. They're just busy. They're going through something. It's not about you. And maybe it wasn't. But that didn't change the feeling, the subtle loneliness of being connected to someone who is already detaching. I felt it before I admitted it, that quiet instinct that whispers, "This feels different now." But I ignored it, because I didn't want to be dramatic, because I didn't want to lose them, because I thought love meant fighting harder when things got uncertain. What I didn't understand yet was that love isn't proven by how hard you fight alone. And sometimes something isn't falling apart because you didn't try enough. Sometimes it's falling apart because it was never meant to stay together. But I wasn't ready to accept that yet, so I stayed, and I tried, and I hoped, even when deep down a quiet part of me already knew this wasn't going to last. The realization didn't hit all at once. It wasn't some dramatic fight. No screaming, no slam doors, no final speech about how we want different things. It was quieter than that. It was in the space between texts, the way replies became shorter, the way conversations that used to flow for hours started feeling forced after 5 minutes. I remember staring at my phone one night, reading the same dry message over and over, trying to find hidden meaning in it. Maybe they were tired, maybe they didn't mean it that way, maybe I was overthinking. I was always the one overthinking. But overthinking only happens when something feels off, and something felt off. They didn't ask about my day the way they used to. They didn't notice small changes anymore. They didn't look at me the same. And when someone stops noticing you, that's when it starts ending. I tried to compensate. I became lighter, easier, less needy. I stopped bringing up things that bothered me. I told myself not to ruin the vibe. I convinced myself that if I could just be a little more patient, a little more understanding, a little less emotional, maybe it would go back to how it was. But here's the truth I didn't want to face. When something is fading, you can't love it back to life. You can't effort your way into someone's certainty. You can't compete with someone's indifference, and I started to feel tired. Not of them, but of carrying it. Carrying the conversations, carrying the reassurance, carrying the hope. It felt like holding water in my hands. The tighter I tried to grip it, the faster it slipped through my fingers. There was one moment I'll never forget. We were together, physically in the same space, but emotionally it felt like there was an ocean between us. They were talking, smiling, present, but not with me. And that's when it hit. You can feel alone even when someone is sitting right next to you. That kind of loneliness is different. It's heavy, because it forces you to admit something. You're fighting for something the other person already let go of. I went home that night with a quiet ache in my chest. Not heartbreak, not yet, just clarity trying to break through denial. I lay in bed replaying everything. The beginning, the excitement, the promises that weren't promises but felt like them. And for the first time, I allowed the thought to fully form. Maybe this isn't temporary. Maybe this isn't a phase. Maybe this is the end, just stretched out slowly so it doesn't look like one. And that's when the question changed. It stopped being, how do I fix this? And started becoming, why am I trying to save something that doesn't want to stay? That's a painful question, because once you ask it, you can't unsee the answer. And the answer was simple. It wasn't that I wasn't enough. It wasn't that I didn't try hard enough. It wasn't that I failed. It was that this, whatever it was never meant to last. And deep down, I think we both knew it. I was just the only one still trying to pretend otherwise. Letting go didn't happen the day it ended. It happened in layers. First, I stopped arguing in my head. I stopped replaying conversations trying to decode where it shifted. I stopped rewriting the past to make it feel fixable. Because once you see something clearly, you can't go back to pretending. I realized I wasn't actually scared of losing them. I was scared of losing the version of myself that believed this was finally it. The version of me that thought, maybe this time it'll stay. That's what I was grieving. Not just the person, but the hope. And hope is harder to bury than people. At first, I wanted answers, closure, a clean explanation I could hold in my hands. But the truth is, not everything ends with clarity. Some things fade because they were only meant to teach you something, not stay with you forever. And when I finally stopped fighting the ending, something strange happened. I felt lighter, still sad, still disappointed, but lighter. because I wasn't dragging something behind me anymore. I wasn't trying to convince someone to see my value. I wasn't overextending myself to maintain something that was already collapsing. I started noticing how much of myself I had minimized to make it work, how often I swallowed words, how often I acted unbothered, how often I accepted less than I needed just to avoid losing them. And that realization hurt, because it meant I wasn't just losing them. I had been losing myself too. But here's the part that changed everything. I didn't hate them. I didn't turn cold. I didn't decide love was stupid. I didn't convince myself I'd never care again. I just understood. Some people come into your life not to stay, but to show you what you tolerate, to show you how deeply you can love, to show you where your boundaries should have been. And once the lesson is learned, the connection has no more purpose. That doesn't make it meaningless. It just makes it temporary. I stopped romanticizing what it could have been. I stopped imagining alternate endings. I stopped wishing they would wake up one day and suddenly become the version I needed. Because if someone has to transform completely to love you properly, they were never aligned with you to begin with. Letting go wasn't loud, it was quiet. It was choosing not to text, not to check their social media, not to ask mutual friends how they were doing. It was choosing peace over curiosity. And slowly I started feeling like myself again. The version of me that didn't revolve around someone else's attention. The version of me that felt steady without external reassurance. The version of me that understood if it was meant to last, it wouldn't have required me to shrink. And that's when the bitterness disappeared. Because I wasn't rejected. I was redirected. It wasn't taken from me. It was removed. And there's a difference. I used to think every ending meant failure. Like if something didn't last, it must not have been real. Or I must not have tried hard enough. Or maybe I just wasn't enough to make someone stay. But now I see it differently. Some things are real even if they're temporary. Some connections are intense because they were never designed for longevity. They burn bright. They feel significant. They teach you something and then they end. Not because you ruined them. Not because they were fake, but because they fulfilled their purpose. It was never meant to last. And that doesn't make it a waste. It made it a chapter. I stopped asking, why didn't it work? And started asking, what did it teach me? It taught me how quickly I attach when I feel understood. It taught me how deeply I love when I feel chosen. It taught me how easily I ignore my intuition when I'm afraid to lose someone. But it also taught me something else. I don't want half effort. I don't want uncertainty disguised as mystery. I don't want potential. I want consistency. I want something that doesn't require me to question it every night. Something that doesn't feel like I'm constantly auditioning for reassurance. Something that doesn't slowly drain me while I call it love. And if that means some things end early, good. Because I'd rather something end than stay in a space where it was quietly deteriorating. I no longer romanticize what we could have been. Because what we could have been would have required them to become someone else. And love shouldn't require transformation to feel secure. It should feel aligned. Now when I look back, I don't feel anger. I feel gratitude. Gratitude that it didn't drag on longer than it needed to. Gratitude that it showed me my patterns. Gratitude that it forced me to raise my standards instead of lowering them further. The ending wasn't a punishment, it was protection. And maybe the most powerful realization of all is this. If it was meant to last, it would have required effort from both sides. It would have felt steady. It would have grown naturally instead of being forced. Love that's meant for you doesn't make you anxious. It doesn't make you question your worth. It doesn't slowly fade while you're fighting to keep it alive. It stays. And if it doesn't stay, let it go. Because not everything that feels intense is meant to be permanent. Some people are lessons, some are mirrors, some are reminders, and some are simply experiences that prepare you for something deeper. It was never meant to last. And now, I'm finally okay with that. Not because it didn't matter, but because I matter more. I used to believe that some people were meant to be in your life forever. That once you found someone who felt like home, someone who made the world quiet and the chaos manageable, you'd never have to let them go. She was that person. Every laugh, every small touch, every moment we shared felt like proof that this was different, that this was real, that maybe, just maybe, this was the kind of love people write songs about. But the truth is, I stayed too long. I held on too tightly. I gave her all the parts of me I thought would make her stay, and somehow it wasn't enough. She started drifting, slowly, quietly. At first, it was easy to ignore. A missed call here, a delayed reply there. I told myself it was work, stress, life getting in the way. I rationalized everything. I convinced myself that if I just waited, if I just gave her space, everything would go back to the way it was. But space doesn't fix distance when someone doesn't want to bridge it. And then the signs became impossible to ignore. The way her energy shifted when I was around. The way her eyes no longer lingered. The way her voice sounded polite instead of soft. Like she was here, but not really. And that's when the doubt started. The questions that eat at you late at night. Was I not enough? Did I do something wrong? Did I miss a sign, a word, a glance that could have made her stay? I kept replaying every moment, every conversation, every laugh, trying to find the turning point, trying to figure out when exactly the person I thought I knew stopped feeling the same way. And slowly, painfully, I realized something that broke me in pieces. Love isn't always enough, even when you care more, even when you give more. Even when your heart is wide open, it's not a guarantee that the other person will choose you the way you choose them. I lost her, the girl of my dreams, the one I imagined a future with, the one who made everything feel possible. She's gone, and the worst part, she didn't leave with anger. She didn't leave with a fight. She left quietly, slowly, like the space between us stretched so wide that neither of us could cross it anymore. Now I sit with the emptiness, the ache of missing someone who no longer wants to be missed, the heaviness of realizing that some dreams don't last. And I have to ask myself the hardest question of all. How do I move on when she was everything I thought I wanted? That's when it hit me. It wasn't just that she left. It was that I had been holding on to a version of her that never truly existed. I realized I had been clinging to hope instead of reality, clinging to the idea of her, the idea of us, rather than seeing who she really was and how things truly were between us. I had given her my everything without ever stopping to ask if it was being received the way I imagined. I overanalyzed every text, every laugh, every small moment, trying to find meaning where maybe there wasn't any. And in the process, I lost myself a little. I saw patterns I had ignored because they were uncomfortable to face. The late replies, the canceled plans, the enthusiasm that faded when I needed it most, the way she only showed up when it was convenient for her. I had made excuses for her. I had rationalized it, told myself, maybe she's busy, maybe she's stressed, maybe she doesn't know how to say what she feels. But deep down, I knew the truth. She wasn't choosing me. And that's when the self-reflection got real. It wasn't that I wasn't enough. It wasn't that I loved too hard or too fast. It was that I was loving someone who wasn't ready, someone who couldn't meet me where I stood. I kept asking myself, why do I care so much about someone who doesn't care the same way? And the answer wasn't simple. I cared because I allowed myself to care. I cared because I invested my heart where it wasn't being nurtured. I cared because I believed in the what could be instead of the what is. I had been overgiving, overthinking, overhoping, and in the process I had allowed my happiness to hinge on someone else's choices. That was the real pattern, the dangerous one, the one that left me feeling empty, desperate, and questioning my worth. The realization was painful, but it was also freeing. It wasn't about blaming her, it wasn't about resenting her for leaving. It was about understanding how I got here, about seeing the ways I had let hope blind me to reality, about recognizing the parts of myself I needed to protect moving forward. It wasn't easy to admit, but I had to face it. I had to stop chasing someone who wasn't chasing me. I had to stop convincing myself that patience and loyalty could force love. I had to accept that sometimes, no matter how much you give, it just isn't enough. When you finally see the patterns, the truth isn't cruel. It's clear. And clarity is the first step toward moving on. The first step toward moving on wasn't forgetting her. It wasn't pretending I didn't care. It wasn't erasing the memories or the way my chest tightened every time her name appeared on my phone. The first step was deciding that I deserved clarity, respect, and reciprocity. I began setting boundaries, small ones at first. I stopped checking my phone obsessively. I stopped reading into her every word, every pause, every tiny signal. I stopped waiting for messages that might never come. I stopped hoping for a version of her that only existed in my mind. And in that space, this quiet, deliberate space, I started to notice something powerful. I could breathe again. I didn't need her validation to feel alive. I didn't need her attention to feel worthy. I didn't need her affection to prove my capacity to love. I began redirecting the energy I had spent on her, on analyzing, on rationalizing, on hoping, back into myself. I invested in the parts of me I had neglected. I did things that made me feel strong, whole, and alive again. I stopped over-explaining my feelings to her. I stopped justifying my worth to someone who had already made their choice. I stopped tolerating the moments of half-love, the silences that burned, the inconsistency that hurt. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to feel power returning to me. I observed my emotions instead of letting them control me. I matched energy where it existed, and I let go where it didn't. I realized that choosing myself didn't make me cold or bitter. It made me steady, grounded, and in control. I didn't turn my back on love. I turned my back on waiting for someone who couldn't meet me. I didn't stop caring. I stopped investing where care wasn't returned. I didn't stop hoping. I started hoping for something mutual, for a love that didn't feel like a battle of patience and perseverance. For the first time in a long while, I felt calm inside my own skin. I felt safe with my own heart. I felt like the person I had been before all the waiting, all the chasing, all the questioning. And that calm, that quiet strength was revolutionary, because it showed me that I didn't need her to be complete, that I didn't need her to feel whole, that I could hold my own heart and protect it without shame or guilt. I started seeing my past love not as a failure, but as preparation, as a lesson in what I would and wouldn't accept, as a reminder that my heart is powerful, but it deserves reciprocity, not half measures. The more I honored my boundaries, the more I recognized my worth. The more I invested in myself, the less I ached for what wasn't mine to hold. And in that space, I started feeling free. Eventually the ache softened, not because I forgot her, not because I stopped caring, but because I stopped letting her absence define me. I realized that moving on wasn't about erasing what we had. It wasn't about pretending the late nights, the small laughs, the moments I thought would last forever never happened. It was about carrying them differently, without letting them weigh me down, without letting them keep me from living. I started living for me, not in a loud, dramatic way, not to prove anything to anyone. I lived for the quiet moments where I could feel myself again, the mornings where I woke up without the heaviness of waiting, the evenings where I went to bed proud of how I spent my day instead of consumed by what could have been. And in that space, I discovered something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. I wasn't bitter, I wasn't angry, I wasn't trapped in what I had lost. I was steady, I was clear, I was open to life again. I realized the truth. Love isn't about holding on to someone who doesn't choose you. Love is about knowing your worth, protecting your heart, and being willing to step away when it isn't returned fully. Some people stay in your life forever, some leave quietly like she did. And that's okay. It doesn't diminish what you felt. It doesn't make your heart smaller or weaker. It makes you human. I learned to honor the love I gave her by giving that same love to myself. I stopped chasing what wasn't meant for me and started chasing clarity, joy, and connection that was mutual. I began to trust that the right people would meet me where I stood, fully, consistently, willingly. And so I moved on, not with resentment, not with regret, but with quiet confidence. I moved on knowing that the girl of my dreams wasn't lost. She simply wasn't the one for me. And that was enough, because the truth is, letting go isn't giving up. It's making space for something real, something that doesn't require hope to fill in the gaps, something that chooses you as fully as you choose it. And now I'm ready. Pain didn't break me. It refined me. Loss didn't define me. It prepared me. And moving on isn't the end, it's the beginning. I stayed, I learned, I grew, and now I'm alive again. There's a moment after a relationship ends that nobody really prepares you for. It's not the breakup itself, it's what happens after, when everything gets quiet. That's when your mind starts doing something you can't seem to stop. You replay it, the conversations, the moments, the little details that didn't seem important at the time. Your brain starts going back through everything like it's searching for something you missed. You think about the way they said certain things, the tone in their voice during that one argument, the night things felt slightly different but you couldn't explain why. And suddenly those memories feel heavier than they did before. because now you're looking at them with the one thing you didn't have back then, the ending. So your mind keeps asking questions. Was that the moment things started going wrong? Was that when they stopped feeling the same way? Was there something I could have said differently? Something I could have done better? And the worst part is you never get answers. So instead, your brain keeps replaying the same scenes over and over again. Like if you analyze it enough times, you'll finally find the explanation that makes everything make sense. But it never really works that way. Because breakups don't usually come from one single moment. They come from 1,000 small things building up quietly over time. Still, that doesn't stop your mind from trying, late at night especially, when the distractions are gone, when your phone isn't buzzing, when the room is dark, when it's just you and your thoughts. That's when the memories get the loudest. You remember the good moments first, the way they used to laugh, the way they looked at you when things were still easy, the little routines you built together without even realizing it. And for a second, it almost feels like they're still there. Then reality comes back, and your mind jumps to the next question. What did I do wrong? Because when someone you loved walks away, it's almost impossible not to assume that somewhere along the way, you messed it up. So you go back through everything again, trying to find the exact moment where things could have been saved. But the truth is, the more you replay it in your head, the more trapped you start to feel in something that already ended. And that's the part nobody talks about. Sometimes the relationship doesn't end when the person leaves. Sometimes it ends weeks later, when you finally stop reliving it. The strange thing about replaying a relationship in your head is that your mind doesn't show you the whole story. It shows you selected scenes, little moments that suddenly feel way more important than they did at the time. You remember the last conversation you had with them. Every word, every pause, every sentence you wish you could take back. You start thinking about what would have happened if you just said something different. Maybe if you had stayed calmer. Maybe if you didn't bring up that one thing. Maybe if you gave them more space. Your brain turns it into this giant what-if loop. What if I did this differently? What if I handled that moment better? What if I noticed the signs earlier? And slowly, without even realizing it, you start rewriting the past in your head. You create these alternate versions of the relationship where everything works out. In those versions, you say the perfect thing. You catch the problems early. You fix the issues before they grow. And in those imaginary timelines, they stay. But reality doesn't work like that. The real relationship didn't have the benefit of hindsight. It was messy. It had misunderstandings. Moments where both of you were tired. Conversations that didn't go the way either of you wanted. And the truth is, two people can genuinely care about each other and still not be able to make it work. But your brain doesn't like accepting that. Because accepting that means admitting something painful. Sometimes there wasn't a single moment you could have fixed. Sometimes the ending wasn't about one mistake. It was about two people who just couldn't meet each other where they needed to. Still, your mind keeps searching, because if you can find the moment where everything went wrong, it gives you the illusion that you had control, that maybe you could have prevented the ending. But deep down, you already know something that's hard to accept. If someone was truly meant to stay, the relationship wouldn't collapse because of one imperfect conversation. Love that lasts doesn't disappear over one moment. And when you finally start realizing that, something shifts. The memories don't disappear overnight. You'll still think about them sometimes. But slowly, you stop treating every memory like a clue in a mystery you need to solve. Because some stories don't need to be solved. They just need to be closed. The hardest part about replaying everything in your head is that you think you're searching for closure. But most of the time, you're actually just reopening the wound. Every time you revisit the memories, you're putting yourself back in those moments again. Back in the conversations, back in the arguments, back in the days when things started feeling different, and your brain keeps asking the same question. Why? Why did they stop loving me? Why did things change? Why wasn't I enough for them to stay? But here's the thing about closure. A lot of people think closure comes from the other person explaining everything perfectly. They imagine one final conversation where the other person sits down and says exactly what happened, exactly why things ended, and somehow that explanation makes the pain disappear. But real life rarely works like that. Most endings don't come with perfect explanations. Sometimes people don't even fully understand their own reasons. Sometimes they just feel something change inside them. And that's a terrifying thing to accept, because if love can change without a clear explanation, then it means there wasn't necessarily a moment you could have prevented. And that's what your mind is trying to fight against. Your mind keeps replaying everything because it wants control. It wants to believe there was a specific moment where the outcome could have been different. But the truth that hurts the most is this: not every ending is caused by a mistake. Sometimes two people just reach a point where they can't continue together. Not because one of them failed, not because one of them wasn't good enough, but because the relationship itself couldn't keep going. And once that happens, no amount of replaying the past will change it. No amount of analyzing old conversations will bring the person back. All it does is keep you emotionally tied to something that already ended. That's why healing doesn't start when the breakup happens. Healing starts when you stop trying to solve the past. When you finally allow yourself to accept something difficult, the relationship is over. And even though your mind keeps pulling you back into those memories, your life is still moving forward. Whether you're ready for it or not, at some point you start noticing something. The memories aren't hurting you the same way they used to. Not because they disappeared, but because you finally stopped treating them like something you need to fix. For a long time, your mind kept going back to the same moments. The last argument, the last message, the last time you saw them. Like if you could just understand it perfectly, the pain would finally make sense. But eventually you realized something important. You weren't replaying it because the answer was still there. You were replaying it because letting go felt like losing them all over again. So part of you held on, not to the relationship itself, but to the idea that maybe you could still figure it out. Maybe if you understood what went wrong, it would somehow undo the ending. But life doesn't give us that kind of control. Some people enter your life, change you in ways you didn't expect, and then they leave. And you don't always get a clean explanation. You don't always get a moment where everything makes sense. Sometimes all you get is time to slowly accept that the story already reached its ending. And when you finally stop replaying it in your head, you start noticing something else. Your life didn't end with that relationship. There are still new people you haven't met. New memories you haven't made. New moments waiting for you that have nothing to do with the past you've been stuck in. Because the truth is, you were never meant to spend the rest of your life trapped in old conversations or wondering about the words you wish you said differently. You were meant to keep living, and one day, without even realizing when it happened, you'll think about them again. But this time it won't feel like a wound. It'll just feel like a chapter of your life that already ended. And you'll finally understand something that once felt impossible. The past only has power over you, as long as you keep replaying it. What if everything was okay? I want you to sit with that question for a second before we go anywhere. Not as a rhetorical thing, not as the opening move of a piece that's about to tell you why everything actually isn't okay and here's what you should do about it. Just as an actual question, a real one. What if everything was okay? What if the text meant nothing? What if the quiet was just quiet? What if the distance you've been feeling was just life being life, and not a signal that something is ending or unraveling or quietly moving away from you? What if the job was actually fine, the relationship was actually fine, the version of yourself you've been worrying about was actually closer to fine than the version your brain has been showing you at 2 a.m.? What if you've been living a problem that doesn't exist? I know how that sounds. I know some of you are reading that and thinking, but the problem is real. The thing I'm worried about is real. I'm not making this up. And you might be right. Some of what you're carrying is real. I'm not dismissing that. But I want to ask the question anyway, because I think for a lot of us, more of us than we'd like to admit, the answer to what if everything was okay is something we haven't let ourselves fully consider, something that feels almost dangerous to believe. Because if everything is okay, then all the energy we've spent managing the ways it isn't was wasted. And if it was wasted, what does that say about how we've been living? That's the question underneath the question, and it's worth sitting with. Let me start with why okay is so hard to trust. Because I don't think the difficulty is random. I don't think you distrust okay because you're irrational or neurotic or constitutionally incapable of peace. I think you distrust okay because okay has been taken away from you before. In specific moments with specific people, in circumstances that started as fine and turned into something else without sufficient warning. You were okay once and then you weren't. And the transition happened fast enough or without enough signal that your nervous system made a note. The note said, okay is temporary. Okay is the thing that exists right before something changes. Okay is not a stable state, it's a phase, a corridor, a brief pause between the last hard thing and the next one. And so you stopped being able to fully inhabit okay, because inhabiting it fully means trusting it. And trusting it means being exposed when it ends. And being exposed when it ends, being surprised by the loss, being caught without your guard up, being genuinely blindsided by something you could have been preparing for. That has happened before and the cost was significant. So you stay slightly ahead of okay. You scan the horizon, you monitor for the thing that's going to end the good period. Because if you can see it coming, you can be ready. And being ready is the closest thing to safe that your nervous system knows how to do. That's not a flaw. That's a perfectly rational adaptation to a history that trains you to expect disruption. The problem is that the adaptation is now running in environments that don't require it, in relationships and circumstances that are actually stable, in moments of genuine okay that you are moving through without being able to feel them because the monitoring never stops. Here's what living outside of okay actually looks like, the daily texture of it. Because I think when it's named specifically, the recognition is useful. It looks like being 3 conversations ahead. The thing being said right now is barely registering, because you're already running the implications, already following the thread to its possible ends, already preparing responses to versions of this conversation that haven't happened. And the person talking to you, the actual person, in this actual moment, is getting a version of presence that is actually absence dressed up as listening. It looks like waiting for the other shoe to drop and cite good things. The relationship is going well. And somewhere in you, there's a quiet countdown. The job is stable, and part of you is already practicing what it would feel like if it wasn't. The friendship is real and warm, and you're enjoying it with one eye on the exit, because people leave, and you've learned not to be surprised when they do. You're enjoying things with a built-in distance, a slight remove, a refusal to fully arrive because fully arrive is what you do right before you get hurt. It looks like being unable to receive good things cleanly. A compliment arrives, and something in you immediately starts auditing it. Is it true? What did they want? Why are they saying this now? The compliment is real. You can probably tell it's real, but your brain has developed a processing step between receiving and believing that almost nothing gets through cleanly. You're filtering the good stuff. You've built infrastructure specifically designed to make the good stuff less able to reach you. And it looks like exhaustion that doesn't make sense on paper. Your life from the outside is fine. Nothing catastrophic is happening. You're managing. But you're tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix because you've been working overtime on threat detection. It hasn't found a real threat in a while and doesn't know how to stand down. I want to talk about what you're missing while you're not in okay. Not in an accusatory way, not in a you're wasting your life way, just the specific things that are happening in the present tense that you're not fully experiencing because part of your attention is elsewhere. You're missing the ease of the people who love you, the specific quality of being with someone who is genuinely glad you're there. Not performing gladness, not being polite, but actually lit up by your presence in a way that doesn't require anything from you except to just be there. That quality is available to you in relationships you already have, and you're experiencing it at about 60% because 40% of you is monitoring whether it's going to last. You're missing your own good moments, the times when something funny happens and you laugh, really laugh, the involuntary kind. And for a second you're completely in it, and then the brain catches up and starts analyzing what the laughter means and whether it's appropriate and what comes next, and the moment is gone before you even registered having it. You've been having your experiences slightly after the fact, processing them as they pass rather than inhabiting them as they happen. You're missing the specific piece of a Tuesday that is just a Tuesday, not building toward anything, not the calm before something, just a day that is what it is, the coffee in the morning, the particular quality of afternoon light, the conversation that doesn't go anywhere important and doesn't need to. The completely ordinary hours that make up most civil life and that you've been moving through like a waiting room instead of like the actual content of being alive. Those things are your life, not the milestone moments, not the dramatic events, not the things worth reporting when someone asks how you've been. The Tuesdays, the ordinary good things that don't make the highlight reel but constitute most of the hours. You've been in those hours. You've just not been fully present for them. Here's a question I want to ask, and I want you to actually think about it rather than answering reflexively. What would you have to give up if everything was okay? Because I don't think the resistance to okay is purely unconscious. I think there are specific things that the not okay serves. And until those things are named, the okay is going to keep being hard to access. Some people would have to give up their explanation. The story of why things aren't working, why they haven't arrived where they wanted to be, why the relationships keep going the way they go. The not okay is doing real narrative work. It explains the gap between where you are and where you thought you'd be. If everything was okay, the gap would have to be explained some other way, and the other way might require looking at choices rather than circumstances. That's a harder look. Some people would have to give up their vigilance, the monitoring, the scanning, the constant low-grade preparedness for things going wrong. And the vigilance, while exhausting, is also a kind of purpose, a job. It gives you something to do with the part of you that can't be still. If everything was okay, that part would have to find somewhere else to go. And somewhere else feels like nowhere. Some people would have to give up their identity as someone who is going through something. The person in the hard season has a specific kind of meaning attached to their struggle. People check on you. You have something real to work through. Your life has a kind of weight to it that disappears if everything is okay. And the absence of weight, the lightness of things actually being fine, can feel strangely like loss, like you've been demoted from something significant to something ordinary. None of that is shameful. All of it is human. But it's worth naming, because the okay is going to keep feeling threatening until you understand what its arrival would cost. I want to say something about the relationship between okay and love, because I think this is where the distrust of okay does the most quiet damage. Love, real love, exists mostly in the okay moments, not in the dramatic ones, not in the fights and the reconciliations and the intensity and the moments of crisis that bring people back to each other. Those moments are real and they have their own meaning, but they're not where love actually lives day to day. Love lives in the Tuesday morning, in the way someone hands you something without being asked, in the conversation that goes nowhere in particular but leaves you feeling known, and the specific comfort of being in a room with someone and not needing the room to be anything other than what it is. Those moments are okay moments. Quiet, ordinary, unremarkable. And if you can't trust okay, if you're always monitoring from a slight distance, always waiting for the texture to change, you're moving through the place where love actually lives without being able to feel it. You're loving people from behind glass. The warmth is real, the connection is real, but you're not quite in contact with it, and the person loving you back can feel that, not as something you're doing wrong, as a distance it can't quite close, as a reaching that never quite lands. And they keep trying. The good ones keep trying. But at some point, being unable to reach someone who is physically present becomes its own kind of lonely. You're not protecting them from your uncertainty. You're keeping them from the version of you that could actually be reached. Let me say something about the version of you that exists when you're actually in okay. The one that doesn't have to be managed into being, that just shows up when the monitoring goes quiet long enough. That version is lighter. Not in a way that lacks depth, in a way that isn't carrying extra weight. It moves through rooms differently. It's more present in conversations because it isn't running parallel processing on what the conversation might mean. It laughs more freely because it isn't checking whether the laughter is appropriate. It reaches for people more naturally because it isn't first assessing the risk of the reaching. You've been that version before. In the moments when the vigilance broke down not because you decided to let it, but because something pulled you fully into the present before the monitoring could catch up. A piece of music. A really good conversation. A sunset that arrived at exactly the right moment. A laugh that was too genuine to be managed. In those moments, you were in your life, fully, completely, without the remove. And then the moment passed and the monitoring resumed, and you went back to the slight distance. But the version of you that existed in those moments, present, unguarded, actually here, that's not a special occasion version. That's the version that's available more broadly if the conditions for it are created more intentionally. If the monitoring is given permission to stand down not just when something pulls you in, but as a practice. A daily, ongoing, imperfect practice of choosing to be in the thing you're actually in. That version is you. More fundamentally you than the vigilant one. The vigilant one was built for a specific purpose. The present one is who you were before the purpose arrived. So what does it look like to let everything be okay? Not as a permanent state, not as a denial of real things that are hard, but as a practice. A daily choice to be where things actually are instead of where your brain has already moved to. It starts with the body. Because okay doesn't arrive as a thought first. It arrives as a physical state, and the body that has been in low-grade threat mode for a long time has forgotten what the alternative feels like, so you start there. In the physical sensation of a moment that doesn't require anything from you. The breath that's slower than it needs to be. The shoulders that drop. The specific quality of a body that is not currently in danger and is being allowed to know that. That experience is available more often than you've been accessing it. Not always. Real life has real difficulty, but in the ordinary moments, in the Tuesday morning, in the conversation with someone who is genuinely glad you're there, it's available. And it requires something from you. It requires you to put down the monitoring long enough to be in the moment you're actually in. Not permanently. Just for this moment, this specific current actual moment that is not requiring anything except your presence in it. And then the next one. And then the one after that. Because that's what okay is, when you let it be what it is. Not a destination. Not a phase before something harder. Not something that will be taken away if you trust it too fully. Just a series of moments that don't require you to be anywhere other than in them. The past that hurts you is real. The future that might be hard is possible. But neither of them is here right now. What's here right now is just this. Just okay. What if everything was okay? I think for a lot of you the answer is, it might be. More often than you're allowing yourself to experience it. more of the time than the monitoring has been willing to admit, in more of your relationships and more of your ordinary days, in more of the hours you've been moving through from a slight remove. The okay is there. It's been there. You've been in it while not quite being in it. You're allowed to be in it. Not as a denial of what's been hard, not as a pretense that life doesn't have difficulty, just as an honest accounting of what this moment actually is. And this moment, right now as you read this, is probably closer to okay than the part of you that never stops scanning is willing to admit. Let it be okay, not forever, not unconditionally. Just right now, just this moment. That's all okay ever asks. Just this one, and then the next. And then the one after that, that's how you come back to your own life. One moment at a time, choosing to be in the one you're actually in. You're always the loser. There's a version of losing that nobody prepares you for. Not the kind where you fail a test or lose a job or get broken up with in a parking lot while your hazards are still on. That kind of losing is clean. It hurts, but it has a shape. You know what you lost. You know when it happened. You can point to the moment and say, that's the one. That's where it went wrong. The kind I'm talking about doesn't have a moment. It's the kind where you keep showing up, keep trying, keep being the bigger person, keep choosing the high road, and somehow, at the end of all of it, you're still the one sitting alone wondering where you went wrong. You did everything right, or at least you did more right than wrong, and you still lost. Not once, every time, and you start to wonder if that's just your thing, if losing is just something that happens to you specifically. I've been thinking about this for a while now, not in a wallowing way, more like there's something here I haven't named yet, and I need to name it before it keeps running my life. Because I think most of us who always end up losing in relationships, friendships, romantic stuff, family stuff, doesn't matter. We don't lose because we're bad at this. We lose because of something that looks like a strength from the outside, something that people compliment us for, something we were taught was the right way to be. We lose because we care more. And I know how that sounds. I know I care too much is the thing everyone says when they want to avoid accountability. Like, yeah, sure, buddy, you care too much. That's why you burned the whole thing down. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about the person who cares so much they become controlling or jealous or obsessive. That's a different thing. I'm talking about the person who genuinely, quietly, consistently loves people harder than those people love them back, and keeps doing it, and can't stop, and doesn't know why. That person always loses. Not dramatically, just slowly, over and over again. Let me back up. I think it starts young. Not in some deep trauma way. I'm not trying to make this a therapy session, but I do think most of us learned early what role we were playing, and some of us learned that our role was to be the one who holds things together. Maybe you were the kid who noticed when mom was in a mood and adjusted accordingly. Maybe you were the one in your friend group who everyone came to when stuff was falling apart. But when your stuff was falling apart, you kind of just handled it yourself because it felt like too much to ask. Maybe you were the sibling who kept the peace, the partner who apologized first even when you weren't wrong just because the silence was too heavy. You learned that love looked like management, like anticipation, like making yourself small enough that everyone else could be big. And here's the thing, and it worked. People liked you, people needed you, people said you were the glue, the rock, the steady one. Nobody asked if the glue was tired, so you kept going. You got good at it, really good. You got so good at reading rooms and adjusting and being whatever the situation needed that you kind of forgot to figure out what you needed. Or maybe you knew somewhere, but asking for it felt like breaking a rule you didn't write, but somehow agreed to. And that pattern, that beautiful, exhausting, self-erasing pattern, follows you into every relationship you ever have. Here's how it plays out in practice. You meet someone, it could be a friend, could be someone you're falling for, doesn't matter. You connect, it feels real. And from the jump, you're in it, you're present, you remember the details, you follow up on the thing they mentioned 2 weeks ago, you show up when you said you would, you notice when something's off and you say something. They like this about you. They tell you. You're different, they say. You actually listen, you actually care, and you feel it. That warmth of being seen, of being valued, of finally being in something that feels like it matches what you've been putting out for years. Except, slowly, quietly, you start to notice the math doesn't add up. You text first most of the time. You're the one who makes the plan. When something good happens to you, you tell them, and they respond warmly but briefly and then pivot to themselves. And when something good happens to them, you ask follow-up questions. You want to know everything. You're genuinely excited for them. They don't do that for you. Not in the same way, and you tell yourself it's fine. People show love differently. You can't expect everyone to be exactly like you. That would be unfair. That would be projecting. So you keep going. But then something hard happens to you, something real, and you reach out and they're supportive, but it feels surface level, like they're being a good person in the way you are a good person to a coworker you don't know that well. Polite, present, but not in it with you. And you know the difference. You know what it feels like when someone is actually in it with you because you've been in it with them. You know what it feels like to sit with someone in their hard thing. You've done it. You're good at it. They're not doing that. They're being kind, but they're not in it with you. And here's the moment. Here's the fork in the road that most of us don't even know we're standing at. You could say something. You could name it. You could say, hey, I feel like I'm carrying more of this than you are, and I need that to change. But you don't, because that feels like an accusation. Because you don't want to be the person who keeps score. Because what if you're wrong? What if you're being too sensitive? What if bringing it up ruins the whole thing and then you lose them anyway and it's your fault? So you say nothing and you adjust your expectations down a little and you keep going. And 6 months later, you're half the person you were when you started this and they're exactly the same and you're exhausted and you don't even know why. That's the loss. That's the one that doesn't have a moment. I want to talk about the hope problem. Because I think hope is actually the engine of all of this. Not hope in the inspirational poster sense. I mean hope in the very specific, very quiet sense of, I think if I keep being this way, eventually it'll come back to me. You believe somewhere underneath everything that love is a long game, that consistency gets rewarded, that if you keep showing up and being real and caring deeply enough, one day the person on the other end of it will match you. Will finally see what you've been putting out and rise to meet it. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes people do wake up. Sometimes the thing you've been patient for actually blooms, but a lot of the time, and I think most of us know this but don't want to say it, a lot of the time, the hope is just delay. It's a way of not having to grieve something that's clearly already gone. Because as long as you're hoping, you don't have to admit that the version of this you wanted was never actually available. That's brutal to accept. That someone you love genuinely, deeply, for real, that someone might just not be built to love you back the way you need. Not because they're bad, not because you did anything wrong, just because they're different. They're wired different. They're at a different place. They need different things. You can love someone and still be wrong for each other. You can care about someone and still be the wrong shape for the hole they're trying to fill. That is a complete sentence. That is the whole truth. There's no fix at the end of it. And when you're the person who loves more, when you're always the one who's more in it, more invested, more hopeful, that truth hits different. Because it means all that extra love you were putting out wasn't the solution. It was just yours. It lived in you. It didn't change anything. That's the part that makes you feel like a loser. But here's where I want to sit for a second, because I've been turning this over for a while and I think there's something we get wrong about what losing actually means. We treat losing like it's about outcome. You win if the relationship lasts. You lose if it ends. You win if they choose you. You lose if they don't. You win if you stop caring first. You lose if you still care when they've already moved on. By that math, yeah. If you're the one who cares more, you lose every time. You will always be the last one in and the last one out and the one who misses it the longest. But I'm not sure that's actually losing. I think what we call losing in love is often just feeling more. And feeling more is not the same as being worth less. It is not a character flaw. It is not a weakness. It is actually one of the rarest things a person can have. Most people spend their whole lives looking for someone who will love them with real depth, real presence, someone who actually listens, who actually shows up, who actually stays. And you who always ends up on the losing side of this, you are that person. You are the thing other people are searching for. The problem isn't that you care too much. The problem is that you keep handing that to people who can't hold it. And I know that sounds like I'm just reframing the same loss as a gift, which is a little bit of a cope. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. You can call it beautiful all you want, but it still hurts to be in a mostly empty thing when you wanted something full. But I do think there's a real difference between I keep losing because something is wrong with me, and I keep losing because I keep choosing people who can't match what I'm bringing. One of those is a sentence about your worth. The other is a sentence about your pattern. And patterns can change. Worth can't, because it was never the issue. let me talk about the aftermath for a second, because I think that's where the real damage lives. When you've been the one who cared more enough times, something shifts in you. You start to get suspicious of your own feelings. You fall for someone and there's this voice in the back of your head, quiet but consistent, that says, I don't. You know how this goes, you know where you end up. So you hedge, you hold back a little, you don't text as much as you want to. You don't say the thing you're feeling right away. You play it cooler than you are because you've learned somewhere in your body that the full version of you is too much. And then, and this is the part that's really something, you end up in relationships where you're actually not fully present, where you're performing a version of yourself that's been dialed back. And those relationships don't work either, because you're not actually in them. And you lose those too. So now you're losing when you care too much and losing when you try to care less. There's no version of this that's working, and the voice in the back of your head gets louder. See? You told you. You're just bad at this. You always lose, but you're not bad at it. You're just protecting yourself with a tool that's hurting you. The hedging, the holding back, the performance of indifference, that's not protection. That's just a different kind of losing. Slower, quieter, but still losing. Because you end up alone anyway. Except this time you're also not yourself. I think the thing that actually needs to change, and I'm saying this as much to myself as anyone, is not the caring. Don't stop caring. Please don't let the world do that to you. The thing that needs to change is the selection, where you're putting it. Because if you're honest, really honest, you probably knew early. You probably saw the signs, the texts, that were always a little shorter than yours, the way they talked about their ex with a little too much energy, going either direction, the way they went quiet when you needed them to go loud, the way the effort was always a little asymmetrical, you saw it, and you talked yourself out of it, because they had so many other good things, and who are you to expect everything, and maybe you're asking for too much, and maybe you just need to give it time. Time doesn't fix asymmetry. Time just shows you what was always true. You have to get better at believing people when they show you who they are early, not cynically, not with your walls up from the jump, but with your eyes open, with the part of you that actually knows what it needs allowed to speak, without being immediately overruled by the part of you that just wants it to work. The right person is not going to require you to shrink yourself to make the relationship function. The right person is not going to make you wonder consistently where you stand. The right person is not going to be a project you're optimistic about. They're going to be someone who makes the asymmetry hard to find because they're actually trying. That person exists. I genuinely believe that. And I think the reason a lot of us haven't found them yet is not because we're unlovable or broken or too much. It's because we keep confusing potential with reality. We keep loving the idea of someone at the expense of the truth of them. So here's where I land on this. You're always the loser. Yeah, in a specific, limited, outcome-based reading of the word. Sure, you care more, you hurt more, you stay longer, you miss it harder when it's gone. But you're not losing at the thing that actually matters. You're not losing your capacity to feel. You're not losing your ability to be present for someone. You're not losing your willingness to be vulnerable even after it's burned you, even though it probably should have made you colder by now, but it didn't. That's not a bug. That is, genuinely, without irony, the whole thing. That's the part of a person that makes love feel like love instead of just convenience. You've been calling it a weakness your whole life because it's kept costing you. But it was never the problem. It was always the best thing about you. The world just kept putting it in front of the wrong people. That's a solvable thing. It's a slow, uncomfortable, sometimes heartbreaking thing to solve. But it's solvable. You're not cursed. You're not broken. You're not destined to always be on the losing side of this. You just need to stop handing your rarest quality to people who don't know what to do with it and start giving it to someone who already knows what they have. I want to be clear about something up front. This isn't a sad story, or it is, in parts, but it's not the kind where I'm sitting in a dim room telling you about all the ways love failed me and how I gave up. That's not what this is. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because I made a choice, an actual, deliberate, eyes-open choice, and I think that choice is one of the more honest things I've ever done for myself. And I also think most people won't understand it until they've been where I've been. So let me try to explain it. The first thing you need to know is that I wasn't always like this. There was a version of me, not that long ago honestly, who was completely all in on the whole thing. The relationship, the partnership, the building a life with someone project. I believed in it. Not in a naive way, not in a Disney movie way, but in the way a person believes in something they've thought seriously about and decided is worth pursuing. I wanted the person who knew my coffee order without asking. I wanted someone to text when something small but funny happened. I wanted the Sunday mornings and the inside jokes and the specific kind of comfort that only comes from being truly known by another person over time. I wanted all of it, genuinely, for years, and I went looking for it, over and over again with real effort, real openness, real willingness to be vulnerable and present, and all the things the books and the podcasts tell you to be, and I kept coming back empty. Not devastated, just empty. Like I'd gone to the well expecting water and found it dry again, and had to walk back the same long road carrying nothing. After enough trips, I stopped going to the well. That's not giving up, that's pattern recognition. Here's what the pattern looked like, because I think this part matters. Every relationship I was in, or almost in, or orbiting around, had the same shape to it. Not the same people, not the same details, but the same underlying geometry. I would show up fully. That was just how I did it. I don't know how to be half in something. Never learned. When I was there, I was completely there, present, invested, paying attention, caring about the small stuff, because the small stuff is where people actually live, and for a while that energy would get matched. The beginning always felt mutual. There was something real there. I wasn't imagining it. The connection was genuine, the warmth was genuine, the feeling that this might actually be the thing was genuine. And then, slowly, something would shift. Not a dramatic shift. Not a fight or a betrayal or a definitive turning point, just a gradual, almost imperceptible drift toward a symmetry, where I was still all the way in, and they had quietly moved to something closer to halfway. And I would notice it and not say anything because I didn't want to be the person who was keeping score. And I would adjust my expectations down a little, and I would fill in the gaps with generous interpretations, and I would keep going until I couldn't, and then it would end. Either because I finally said something, or they finally left, or it just quietly died from the weight of its own imbalance, and I would be the one sitting with the full grief of it while they seemed, from the outside, at least, more or less fine. That happened enough times that I had to ask myself a serious question. Is this bad luck? Or is this me? And the answer, the honest one, the one I had to sit with for a long time before I could say it clearly, was both. Some of it was bad luck. Some of it was timing, incompatibility, the simple fact that most relationships don't work out, and that's not a reflection of anyone's worth. But some of it was me, specifically a version of me that I had been dragging into every relationship without fully examining it. I was choosing people who needed to be convinced, not in a dramatic way, not people who were cruel or checked out completely, but people who were, at their core, slightly ambivalent. People who were kind of available, sort of interested, generally positive, but never quite fully choosing me. People for whom I was a good option, but not the obvious one. And I kept choosing them because I confused the work of convincing someone with the feeling of earning something. Like if I had to work for it, it must be worth something. Like if it came easily, it probably wasn't real. That's a broken piece of logic, and I ran it for years. The love I was chasing was the love that felt like proof. Proof that I was worth the effort. Proof that someone who wasn't sure could become sure because of me, because of what I brought, because of who I was when I was fully present. What I actually found every time was people who remained a little unsure, and me, exhausted from the convincing, wondering why it still felt like I was auditioning. You cannot love someone into certainty. I know that now. Certainty about a person is something you either have or you don't. It's not something that gets built through accumulated evidence. But I didn't know it then. I kept trying to build it, and I kept being surprised when the foundation didn't hold. So I stopped. Not dramatically, no announcement, no declaration. I just stopped putting myself in situations that I already knew the shape of. Stopped swiping. Stopped accepting the half invitations from people who were interested in theory, but not in practice. Stopped extending myself toward things I could already tell weren't going to hold. And the first thing I noticed was how much energy I got back. That sounds almost embarrassingly simple, but it's real. The amount of mental and emotional bandwidth that I had been pouring into other people, into decoding their behavior, into managing my own hope, into the constant quiet work of being in something that wasn't quite working. That bandwidth suddenly had nowhere to go, and it came back to me. It's the strangest feeling. Suddenly having access to your own full attention. Suddenly being the primary recipient of your own care. I'd been so focused outward for so long that being focused inward felt almost disorienting at first. Like, what do I actually like? Not what do I like doing with someone else? What do I like alone, for no reason except that it's good for me? I had to relearn that, which is a little embarrassing to admit, but it's true. I want to be careful here, because I think there's a version of this story that slides into something self-congratulatory. Like, I chose myself, I learned to love being alone, now everything is better and I don't need anyone. That's not what I'm saying. That version is a little too clean, and I don't trust it. The truth is, being alone is hard in ways that being in a bad relationship is not. Being in a bad relationship is its own kind of hard. The grief of it, the confusion of it, the way it chips at you, I'm not romanticizing that. But there's a version of the suffering in a relationship that at least has company. You're not okay, but you're not okay with someone. There's another person in the room. Being alone means being not okay by yourself. It means the hard nights are genuinely quiet. It means there's no one to reach for when you wake up and the world feels like too much. It means birthdays and holidays and Sunday afternoons that can feel very wide and very empty if you let them. I feel that. I'm not pretending I don't, but here's the difference. When I was in those half relationships, those asymmetrical things, I felt alone anyway. I felt alone while texting someone. I felt alone at dinner with someone. I felt alone in the middle of a conversation with someone who was technically present but not really there. I felt alone in the specific, suffocating way that only happens when you're with another person who isn't meeting you. That kind of alone is worse than the real kind, because the real kind is honest. It doesn't pretend to be something it isn't. It doesn't make you question yourself. It doesn't ask you to keep pouring into it while it gives you just enough warmth to stay. Alone is just quiet, and quiet I can work with. There's something that started happening after a few months of this that I didn't expect. I started liking myself more, not in a self-help affirmation way, in a specific practical way. I started noticing things about myself that I genuinely liked, qualities that had always been there, but that I'd been spending so much energy managing in the context of other people that I hadn't fully felt them. My ability to sit with hard things without needing to immediately fix them, the way I think about problems, the strange specific humor that only really comes out when I'm comfortable. The things I care about that I used to soften or shrink because I wasn't sure they'd land with whoever I was trying to impress. Those things don't need to be approved of when there's no one to approve them. They just are. They're just mine. And I realized, and this is the part that hit me harder than I expected, I realized that for years I had been trying to get other people to validate things about me that I hadn't validated for myself yet. I was looking for them to confirm that I was worth loving before I'd really decided that for myself. That's not a thing another person can do for you. I see that clearly now. You can be loved by a dozen people and still feel worthless if you haven't done the internal work. Love from the outside doesn't fill the inside. It just temporarily covers the gap. I had to do that work, and I could not do it while I was constantly looking outward. Let me tell you about a specific night that I think about sometimes. It was a Saturday, about 4 months into doing this thing deliberately. And I had nothing going on, no plans, no one to meet, no one to check in with. Just a whole evening by myself. A few months earlier, that would have felt like failure, like evidence of something wrong with my life. I would have spent half of it anxious, texting people, trying to manufacture some company, telling myself I was fine while quietly being not fine at all. That night I made dinner, took longer than I needed to, listened to music I liked at a volume I liked, ate at my own table in my own time without checking my phone, watched something I'd been meaning to watch for a long time, went to bed when I was actually tired, not because there was nothing else to do. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, I realized I was happy. Not in an event way, not because something good had happened, just quietly, steadily happy, content actually, in a way that didn't require anything from anyone. That felt new, that felt important, because I think for most of my adult life, I had been treating happiness as a thing that required ingredients, people, plans, someone to share it with. And that night I discovered it could just be a state, a default, something you could arrive at by removing the things that were disrupting it rather than adding more things to try to create it. That was the night I really understood why I'd chosen this. I want to address the thing people say, because there are a few responses you get when you tell someone you're choosing to be alone, and most of them are well-meaning but not quite right. The first one is, you'll change your mind when you meet the right person. Maybe. I'm not ruling it out. I'm not taking a vow. But this statement assumes that the choice to be alone is a temporary state of waiting, like I'm just in a holding pattern until the right flight comes in. And that framing misses the whole point. I'm not waiting. I'm here. I'm actually fully here, in this life, right now. Not as a placeholder until something better comes along. The second one is you're scared of getting hurt. And look, yes, obviously, I'm a person. I've been hurt, and getting hurt is part of the record. But choosing to be alone isn't the same as choosing to be closed. I'm not building walls. I'm building a self that is solid enough that the next time I open up to someone, I'm doing it from a place of wholeness instead of a place of need. There's a difference between protecting yourself out of fear and protecting yourself out of self-respect. One closes everything down and the other just raises the standard. The third one, and this is the one that's hardest to explain, is, but don't you get lonely? Yes, sometimes, of course. But loneliness that comes from being alone is clean. It's honest. It points at a real thing, a real gap, a real human need. And I can sit with it, name it, feel it, and let it pass. That's survivable. That's just being human. The loneliness that comes from being in the wrong relationship and from being with someone and still feeling unseen, unchosen, like a guest in something that should feel like home, that loneliness has no clean edge. You can't point to it. You can't name it without sounding ungrateful. You can't let it pass because the source of it is still right there next to you. And every day you're in it, you're just adding more distance between yourself and the life you actually want. I'll take the honest loneliness every time. I've been thinking lately about what I actually want. Not as a performance of self-awareness, like the real list, the one I'd only tell myself. I want to feel chosen, really chosen. Not tolerated, not convenient, not the best available option for someone who's still looking over their shoulder. Chosen. The way you choose something when you thought about it clearly and you still want it. The way you choose something and then keep choosing it on the days when it's difficult. I want someone who wants to know me. Not the surface, not the job and the opinions and the easy conversation. The actual me. The specific, sometimes difficult, definitely imperfect actual person. I want it to feel mutual. I want to stop being the one who loves more, works more, stays more. I want to be in something that meets me somewhere in the middle and stays there. And I decided, and this is the core of all of this, I decided that I would rather wait for that thing than keep settling for the shapes of it. I would rather be here in my own life, fully present, and genuinely okay, than be in something halfway good that slowly costs me myself. That's not lowering my expectations. It's raising them. It's saying it's this specific thing, this particular experience of being really seen and really chosen and really met. That's what I'm holding out for. Not perfection, not the absence of difficulty, just mutuality, just real. And until that's available, I'm here. I'm fine here. I'm more than fine. So that's why I chose to be alone. Not because love failed me, though it did sometimes. Not because I stopped believing in it, because I didn't. Not because I'm scared, though fear is part of everything. Because I finally got honest about what I was actually doing when I kept showing up for things that weren't working. I was filling a space, managing a loneliness, keeping myself busy with the project of someone else so I didn't have to sit with the quieter, harder project of myself. And the quieter, harder project turned out to be the important one. I know who I am now in a way I didn't before. I know what I need, I know what I'm willing to give and what I'm not willing to keep giving to things that take it without returning it. I know the difference between loving someone and needing them to make me feel like I'm okay. That knowledge didn't come from a relationship, it came from the absence of one. From enough quiet to actually hear myself. And when the right person comes, if they come, when they come, I'll be someone worth finding. Not someone still figuring out what they want. Not someone so hungry for connection that they'll take any version of it. Someone whole. Someone who wants it but doesn't need it to survive. Someone who chose themselves first and is now maybe ready to choose someone else. That's the version of this I want. That's what I've been building toward. And it started with choosing to be alone. Why doesn't she love me? I met her on a Tuesday. Nothing special about the day, no rain, no music playing in the background, no movie moment, just a random Tuesday. She sat 2 seats in front of me in class, laughing with her friend about something I couldn't hear, but I remember thinking one thing. I want to know what makes her laugh like that. The first time we talked was stupid. I dropped my pen. She picked it up before I could. "Here," she said, smiling. 3 seconds. That's how long the conversation lasted. But for some reason, I thought about it the rest of the day. Weeks passed. Eventually, we started talking more. At first, it was small things, homework, classes, teachers we both hated. Then it became normal. We'd sit next to each other, walk out of class together, send random messages late at night. And somewhere along the way, I started noticing things. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. The way she laughed at her own jokes. The way she said my name. That's when it happened. I liked her. Everyone around me knew it before I admitted it. My friends would say things like, "Bro, you're down bad." I'd laugh it off. But they were right. Because suddenly everything I did started revolving around her. I'd check my phone hoping she texted. I'd replay conversations in my head. I'd think about what she meant when she said something, over and over again. One night we were texting. It was past midnight. The conversation slowed down until it turned into one of those deep talks people only have when they're tired. She told me about her fears, about how she overthinks everything, about how she's scared of getting hurt. And I remember staring at my screen thinking, how could anyone hurt someone like her? Then she sent a message. "Thanks for always being there." That sentence felt like winning the lottery. Months passed like that. Same routine, talking, laughing, late night conversations, but something was missing. Something obvious. She never flirted, never hinted, never gave me the signals everyone talks about, but she also never left. So I convinced myself it meant something. One day my friend asked me a question. "Have you told her you like her yet?" I laughed. "No." "Why not?" I didn't have an answer. The truth, I was scared, not of rejection, but of losing what we already had. Then one afternoon everything changed. We were sitting outside after class. The sun was going down. People were walking past us. She was telling me about some guy in her class. "Yeah, he's really nice." She said something about the way she said it felt different. I tried to play it cool. "Oh yeah?" She smiled. "I think he likes me." My chest tightened. "So, do you like him?" She paused, then she nodded. "Maybe." I remember smiling. I remember saying something like, "That's cool." I remember acting normal. But inside my head, one thought kept repeating, "Why isn't it me?" That night I stared at my phone. Her contact was at the top of my messages. All I had to do was type 3 words. "I like you." But my fingers wouldn't move, because suddenly I realized something. If I sent that message, everything could change. A week later, she told me they were going on a date. She seemed excited, happy, and I tried to be supportive. "Hope it goes well," I said. She smiled. "Thanks." That night I walked home alone. The same question kept replaying in my head, over and over again. Why doesn't she love me? I was there for her. I listened to her problems. I cared about her. So why him? It took me a long time to understand something. Love isn't a reward. It's not something you earn by being the nicest person. You can't calculate it like a math equation. Care plus time plus loyalty not equal to love. Sometimes people just don't feel the same way. Months later, we stopped talking as much. Not because we fought, just because life moves on. Different classes, different schedules, different people. But every once in a while, I still think about her laugh on that random Tuesday. And if you're watching this right now, maybe you're asking the same question I once did. Why doesn't she love me? And the answer might be something you don't want to hear. Sometimes there isn't a reason. But one day you'll meet someone who looks at you the way you once looked at her. And when that happens, you won't have to ask the question anymore. Because the right person won't make you wonder. They'll make it obvious. You know what the worst part is? It's not the rejection. It's the almost. Because when someone rejects you clearly, it hurts. but at least it makes sense. They say no, you move on. But when someone almost loves you, that's a different type of pain, because you start replaying everything, every conversation, every laugh, every moment you thought meant something, and you start asking yourself questions that never have real answers. Did I say something wrong? Was I not good enough? Did I wait too long? After she started dating that guy, things between us didn't stop immediately. That's what made it worse. We still talked sometimes, still laughed, still had those random conversations that used to make my day. But something had changed, and we both knew it. There was this invisible line between us now. Before, it felt like we were walking towards something. Now it felt like we were standing still, and she was slowly walking away. One night she texted me again. Can I vent for a second? Of course she could. She always could. So I stayed up listening to her talk about problems with her boyfriend, how he didn't understand her, how he didn't listen the way I did, how he wasn't as patient as I was, and the entire time I just sat there thinking one thing. Then why aren't you with me? But I didn't say that. Instead I said the same thing I always said. I'm here for you. And she replied with the same message she always sent. You're such a good friend. That sentence. You're such a good friend. People say it like it's a compliment. But when you love someone, that sentence feels like a door closing, because suddenly you realize something. You weren't the guy she loved. You were the guy she felt safe with. The guy she vented to. The guy who listened. The guy who stayed. But safety doesn't always create attraction. And that realization messes with your head, because you start thinking, maybe I should have been different. Maybe I should have flirted more. Maybe I should have been less available. Maybe I should have acted like I didn't care. And that's when something dangerous starts happening. You begin to question the way you are as a person. You start thinking kindness is weakness. You start thinking loyalty is stupidity. You start thinking caring too much is the reason you got hurt. So slowly, you start changing. You stop texting first. You stop opening up. You stop showing people the parts of you that once cared deeply. Because somewhere in your mind, you're trying to protect yourself. I remember the exact moment I noticed that change. She sent me a message one afternoon. Something funny, a meme we both would have laughed at months earlier. I looked at it, and for the first time, I didn't feel anything. Not excitement, not happiness, just nothing. And that scared me more than the heartbreak ever did. Because heartbreak means you cared, but feeling nothing, that means something inside you shut down. That night I stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything that happened, and for the first time I asked a different question. Not, why doesn't she love me? But why did I give so much of myself to someone who never asked for it? That realization hits hard, because the truth is, she never promised me anything. She never said she loved me. She never said we were going to end up together. Those were expectations I built in my own head, and when those expectations broke, I blamed her. But deep down, I knew something. I wasn't just sad about losing her. I was sad about losing the version of me that believed things would work out. The version of me that believed if you cared enough, if you tried hard enough, if you stayed long enough, eventually someone would choose you. But life doesn't work like that. And realizing that changes you quietly, slowly, but permanently. But because after that, you start guarding your heart differently. Not because you want to, but because you remember exactly how it felt when someone almost loved you. And almost can mess someone up for a long time. And the craziest part, even after all that, there were still nights where I caught myself wondering the same thing. Just staring at the ceiling, asking a question I already knew the answer to. Why doesn't she love me? You know what nobody tells you about heartbreak? It doesn't end the day you realize the truth. That moment where everything finally clicks, where you accept she isn't choosing you, where you tell yourself you're done thinking about her. That's not the ending. That's just the beginning of the quiet part. Because after that realization, life keeps moving, but your mind doesn't move as fast. You still catch yourself checking your phone sometimes, not because you expect a message, but because your brain spent so long hoping for one that the habit never fully disappears. You'll hear a song that reminds you of her, or pass a place you both used to talk about, or see something random that you know she would have laughed at, and for half a second, your mind goes straight to her, before you even realize it. It's strange how people can leave your life, but pieces of them stay behind in your routine, in your memories, in the way you think. At first, you hate that. You want to forget everything. Every late night conversation, every inside joke, every moment you thought meant something. Because remembering feels like reopening a wound that's trying to close. But memories don't disappear just because you want them to. They fade slowly, and that takes time. During that time, you start noticing something about yourself. Something you didn't see when you were chasing her. You start realizing how much of your energy went into someone who never fully gave theirs back. How much time you spent thinking about what she wanted, what she needed, what she felt, while completely ignoring your own feelings. You start asking yourself questions you never asked before. Why was I okay with being second? Why was I always the one giving more? Why did I keep staying when the signs were obvious? And the honest answer isn't always pretty. Sometimes it's because you liked the idea of her more than the reality. Sometimes it's because you thought if you were patient enough, if you were good enough, eventually she'd realize what she had. But the hardest truth, sometimes people already know exactly what they have. They just don't want it the same way you do. That realization used to make me angry. Not at her, at myself. Because once you see the pattern, you start wondering how many times you ignored your own instincts. There were signs, of course there were. Moments where she pulled away. Moments where her effort didn't match yours. Moments where you felt confused instead of secure. But every time those moments appeared, you explained them away. You told yourself she was just busy, just stressed, just going through something. You gave her the benefit of the doubt so many times that eventually you stopped questioning anything at all. And that's when you lost control of the situation, not because she manipulated you, but because you convinced yourself that waiting was the same thing as building something. Eventually, though, life forces you to move forward, even if your heart isn't completely ready. Weeks pass, then months. You start focusing on other things, work, friends, your own goals, the parts of your life that existed before she showed up. And slowly, you start feeling like yourself again. Not the exact same person, but a version of you that's a little quieter, a little more cautious, a little harder to read. One day you notice something strange. You go a whole day without thinking about her, then 2, then a week. And when you finally do remember her, the feeling isn't the same, the pain isn't sharp anymore. It's dull, distant, like a memory instead of a wound. That's when you realize something important. You didn't just lose her. You learned something from her. You learned what it feels like to give your heart fully. You learned what it feels like when that heart isn't returned. And most importantly, you learned what it feels like to survive that. Because at one point, and you thought that pain would break you, that it would stay forever, that you'd never stop asking the same question. But eventually, that question starts changing. It stops being, why doesn't she love me? And starts becoming something else. Something quieter, something more honest. Why did I believe someone who never chose me was meant for me? You know what's strange? For the longest time, the question stayed the same. Why doesn't she love me? It sat in the back of your mind like a locked door you couldn't open. You replayed every conversation, every moment, every small detail, trying to find the exact second where something went wrong. Maybe if you had said something different. Maybe if you had waited longer. Maybe if you had been more patient, more confident, more interesting, more enough. That's the dangerous part about unreturned love. It convinces you that the problem must be you. Because if the problem is you, then at least it means you could have fixed it. But the truth is something most people don't realize until much later. Love isn't a test you pass by trying harder. It's not a reward you earn by being patient. It's not something you convince someone to feel. Real love happens naturally. Two people choosing each other, not one person chasing while the other hesitates. Not one person waiting while the other decides, choosing freely every day. And once you understand that, something inside you shifts. You stop looking back at the situation as a failure. You start seeing it as clarity. Because if someone doesn't love you, it doesn't mean you were unlovable. It just means you were loving the wrong person. That realization takes time to accept. At first, it almost feels unfair because you gave so much. Your time, your attention, your loyalty, your patience. And in the end, you didn't get the ending you hoped for, but something else happened instead. You changed. You became more aware, more protective of your energy. You started noticing the difference between interest and convenience, between effort and empty words, between someone who enjoys your attention and someone who genuinely values your presence. That kind of awareness doesn't come from easy love. It comes from heartbreak. And one day, without even realizing it, you stop thinking about her in the same way. You remember the story, but you don't feel trapped in it anymore. She becomes part of your past, not the center of your future. And when you think back to the question that once consumed you, why doesn't she love me? You finally understand something. It was never the right question. The real question was never about her feelings. It was about your worth. And the moment you stop measuring your value through someone else's love, that question disappears completely. Because the truth is simple. Someone out there will meet you, and they won't hesitate. They won't need time to figure it out. They won't treat you like an option. They'll see you, they'll choose you, and they'll make that choice obvious. When that day comes, you won't be asking why someone doesn't love you anymore. You'll finally understand that the right person never makes you question it in the first place.